ora, and welcome to Money and You, an initiative of the Financial Services Council that aims to grow your financial confidence and well-being through personal stories, tips, insights, and conversations with experts like our guest today, Jon Duffy, who is the CEO of Consumer New Zealand. Welcome, Jon.
Got up.
Thanks for joining me. The Financial Services Council and Consumer New Zealand both conducted some research earlier this year into attitudes to home ownership in New Zealand. And there were some pretty interesting findings and some similar findings. I think the main one being that those who are not on the property ladder yet, surprise, surprise, feel locked out of the housing market. So I thought today we could chat a little bit about how Kiwis feel about home ownership, and whether this dream of owning our own home is just that, a dream. So before we get into that hot topic though, could you explain a bit about what Consumer New Zealand is and what you guys do?
Sure. Well, we've been around for about 60 years, just over 60 years, and we're primarily a consumer research organisation. And off the back of that research, we have a platform to advocate for the rights of consumers. And increasingly in our modern society, that's kind of coalescing with advocacy for environmental concerns and social concerns as well. And I think the discussion we're going to have today on housing and property ownership really blends into a broader social issue. So we find ourselves really at the intersection of consumer rights and a broader kind of social justice platform.
Awesome. So you conduct this, now correct me if I'm wrong, it's a nationwide study called the Sentiment Tracker. Is that something that you do every year? Could you talk to me a little bit about that and some of the findings from the most recent Sentiment Tracker?
Yeah, sure. So it's a nationwide or nationally representative sample of consumer sentiment, as the name suggests, right? So we recognised about 6 months ago that we are often asked to represent the views of New Zealand consumers, and we would often march out in front of the media and say, well, New Zealand consumers are worried about X or Y. And often that was based on evidence, but often it was based on those consumers who'd contacted us to tell us that X or Y was a problem. And we felt that we needed a bit more of a representative temperature check on what people are thinking on the big issues. And so we go out quarterly to more than 1,000 consumers, different consumers each time, and we make sure that our survey sample is representative of not just the types of people who may typically be members of Consumer NZ, but actually represent the population itself.
Mm-hmm. And so what are these big issues that you tend to ask people about?
So wide range. So attitudes to the property market is a huge one, right? But we also ask more general questions such as what's worrying you? What are the big concerns? And you won't be surprised to hear that top of the list in the last issue of the Sentiment Tracker was concerns about housing and the property market. So other big concerns would include the cost of living, the environment is obviously up there as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so concerns about affordability of the housing market are right up there. So obviously a lot of Kiwis are worried about it. In terms of delving a bit more into this whole affordability of housing topic, is there anything interesting that you found there? I mean, did you notice that certain groups of New Zealanders were more worried than other groups? Can you talk to me a bit more about that?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there, and I think you mentioned it in your introduction, but people who aren't on the property ladder are the most concerned about the property market. So we found that 42% of people who aren't homeowners, property owners, are concerned that they are now permanently locked out of the property market. And similarly, 20% of the people we surveyed who were saving for a deposit felt that they were saving, but they couldn't catch up, that the goalposts were moving further and further away. And for me, if I think of those two data points, the first one is kind of logical. If you're not in the market, you feel excluded, regardless of any questions of affordability. I mean, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that there isn't a problem with the price of houses, if you're not in the market, that is. But kind of divorcing the first from the second there momentarily, that's a rational feeling. The second point, the people who are actively working away, trying to save a deposit, and let's look at medium average deposits in Wellington are around the $200,000 mark at the moment. I'm just saying that because I'm based in Wellington, but it'll be far worse in Auckland. You've got people who are working their guts out to save a deposit, and they're seeing that goal move further and further away. That at a societal level, we should be really worried about that. And we were talking about it off air, but Consumer NZ does a little podcast called Consume This, and we recently did one on property market. And we interviewed a couple from Whangarei who'd purchased a house in the last 12 months. And they're really average New Zealand people. She was a nurse, he was a sparky. They were absolutely stoked to have got into the property market, but their house earned more in capital gains than their combined incomes for the last 12 months. That is insane. That is a real sign of a housing market that is out of control. It's got too hot. And what I really loved about the interview with that couple was the fact that they appreciated they were really lucky, and they said that they would be more than happy to see housing prices stabilize or even come off a little bit, knowing that they were, being perfectly aware that they would lose a little bit in their investment, because they saw the injustice, they saw the amount of their contemporaries who were locked out of the market and wanted to do something broader to help those people. There's not much they can do, sell their house maybe, but they were really conscious of the fact that they were privileged. They were part of a privileged few amongst their friend group.
In terms of trends over time, now my guess would be that people have become more and more worried about housing affordability over, say, the recent past kind of couple of years as house prices have climbed and climbed. Is that reflected in your data? Have you noticed that, attitudes towards housing affordability have changed over time, and perhaps people are becoming more worried, or has it been pretty consistent?
Well, we've only done two quarters of this survey. It's quite a new thing for us, and the most recent data isn't available yet. It's back from market, but it hasn't been analysed, so I can't tell you that at the moment. But my guess is that yes, it would be, and it would follow a line with the gap between average incomes and average house prices are no doubt a cause for increasing concern as salaries don't keep up with property prices.
And then in terms of, probably already answered this question, but in terms of where we're heading, so in 2022 and beyond, do you see this problem, of people worrying so much and feeling locked out of the property market, is that only going to increase and become worse?
It's really hard for me to say. It's property ownership is such an intrinsic part of the New Zealand society that I don't see our habits and our attitudes to property changing anytime soon. I think there is an expectation amongst property owners that the value of their property is only ever going to increase. And while we have such a rampant appetite for investment in property, government is disincentivized to do anything, whether it's changes to the tax system or other potential measures that would get in the way of that voter expectation that their property's only going to increase. All the while, as this gap between, the landed class or the landed gentry, people who have got property and those who don't, increases, there's, I guess what I'm trying to say is at the moment, the balance hasn't tipped so far in favour of the people, the have-nots, I guess, that the government's going to rock the boat to annoy the haves. At some point, we will get to that point. I don't know whether it's the short term, but it could be in the medium term that we actually get to that point where voters are organised enough around the property issue that they vote in a government that will address this issue. And I know this isn't a political platform, and I try and steer clear of any political commentary to the greatest extent that I can. But this issue will continue to polarize society until there is some sort of government intervention. I'm not an expert enough to say what that intervention should be, and I wouldn't draw any conclusions there. But we're continuing to see wealth accumulated in fewer and fewer people in our society, and it flows into our perception, our self-perception as a country, as a society. I don't think we are the classless society that we like to perceive ourselves at, because there is such a difference between those who are on the property ladder, and those who aren't. As a father with children who, as a property owner myself, I see the immediate advantages my children have over contemporaries of mine who are still renting. In their, I know you wouldn't believe it, but I'm in my 40s. They're still renting, and there's already a difference between the future available to my children and the future available to their children, because of the wealth that I've been able to accumulate simply through being lucky enough to enter the property market at a certain period of time.
The issues that this current generation are facing with being priced out will then be transferred to their kids and their kids.
Yeah, without intervention, it will. And we might think it's bad now, but it could get exponentially worse.
I know there's a lot of doom and gloom, and it can be quite disheartening at times to talk about all of this. Is there anything, from a consumer's perspective, is there anything that we ourselves can do to try to mitigate these worries? Is it, I know you mentioned before that you don't think that our attitudes and this culture around the importance of home ownership in New Zealand is likely to change. Is that something that probably will have to change if there isn't any intervention? Will we have to kind of at some point go, okay, maybe home ownership isn't the be all and end all, and accept that? Is that likely?
I think there's already an acceptance in certain parts of society that people may be lifelong renters, but I don't think that's an active choice. I'm sure there's a preference for owning property. It's just not financially feasible for those people to enjoy a good standard of living and own a house. I think of people who have bought in the last 6 months with looming interest rate rises, who might be leveraged right up to the maximum, and those people are pretty vulnerable, and will be devoting a significant portion of their weekly household income to servicing the mortgage already. And if interest rates move, there's some precarity there. So I worry about that. Um, but equally, there's nothing wrong with not owning a property. We just have an obsession with it in this country. I mean, if you go to Europe, property ownership is far less common than what it is here, and people are cool with that. There's good protections for renters. There's security of tenure, so that you can safely say, hey, I don't own this house, but I know I can bring my family up in it for the next 20 years, and I don't have to worry about the effects of my children having to move every 6 months. In New Zealand, we don't have protections like that at all, and there's really. I was talking to Alan Thorpe from Habitat for Humanity the other day, who sees some terrible cases of the fallout from a lack of security of tenure. There's mental health issues that arise. There's physical health issues that arise from the quality of some of our rental stock. Landlords get a bad rap. There's great landlords out there that do manage to balance the idea of turning a profit on an investment or getting a return on an investment and actually offering a quality product to their tenant that takes the moral responsibility of providing someone their home seriously, rather than flogging the guts out of an investment to get maximum return, actually taking that moral obligation really seriously. But it shouldn't be a lottery whether you get one of those landlords. That should be how all landlords approach what is a pretty serious undertaking when you're providing someone their home. And if we can't be satisfied that all landlords will do that, we need the legislative framework in place to ensure that they have to. And we've made some improvements recently, but I don't know if we're quite there.
I guess to wrap things up then, is there anything you'd sort of like to leave people with? Is there any hope, I guess, or light at the end of the tunnel for anyone out there, who might be in a situation where they're feeling just so overwhelmed and frustrated and locked out of the property market? Any words of wisdom?
My words of wisdom would be look to other investments. If you feel that owning a home ownership is the only way that you can kind of make it in this world and get ahead, pause and think more broadly. And I know it's easy for me to say as a member of the landed gentry, who was lucky enough to get into the property market at a certain period of time. But there's nothing, in my mind, there's nothing wrong with accepting the fact that, hey, you might need to rent for the foreseeable future until the market calms down. There's a lot of interventions that are being looked at the moment. Government's looking at increasing supply, various other things. Those things will all take time to filter through, and it could be that now's just not the right time to buy. And the FOMO that you feel when you see, people, your mates getting into the housing market needs to be balanced with the strain that they're putting themselves under to enter into what is an overheated market.
But yeah, I guess that's a good point, isn't it? Owning a home and taking on a mortgage, it's not all rainbows and sunshine. It's a huge responsibility, especially at the moment, when the future's a bit uncertain. So yeah.
I think that's the exact point, and we just don't know. We can have good guesses, but we know that interest rates will rise in the next 12 months. We don't know how far. But if you're really stretched to get in right now, what is the impact of even half a point in OCR movement? What's that gonna do to your weekly income? Need to think about that, I think.
Thanks so much, Jon, for sharing your words of wisdom and your insights into housing affordability and this whole home ownership topic. It's Yeah, it's a hot topic for sure, and there's a lot of noise about it. But yeah, I think it's a really important issue to touch on, and really appreciate your time. Where if people want to find out a little bit more in terms of keeping up to date with your sentiment tracker and the findings, and perhaps your podcast, where can they find you?
They can find us at consumer.org.nz and just throw a search in for podcast and you'll get the podcast, or throw a search in for sentiment tracker and you'll get the sentiment tracker. And those new results should be out next week. So it'll be very interesting to see what's happening pre and post the most recent COVID lockdowns, and seeing how consumer sentiment may have been influenced by the lockdown.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing those results. Thanks again, Jon.
No problem. Have a great day.